Mason's shift ended later than usual. He was exhausted, but the thought of getting home kept him moving. He decided to cut through an old field on the outskirts of town, a shortcut he'd never tried before. The moon was shrouded in clouds, casting a dull silver glow over the landscape. As he made his way through the tall grass, something flickered in the distance, a dim, swaying lantern. It didn't look like it belonged there. At first, Mason thought it was a prank. Who leaves an old lantern hanging in the middle of nowhere? But curiosity gnawed at him. He had to see it for himself. As he approached, the wind stilled. No sound, no crickets, no leaves rustling. Just the faint crackle of the lantern's flame. The lantern stood upright on a crooked post, like it had been placed there deliberately. Below it, a scrap of yellow paper fluttered. Mason leaned in to read.
"Follow the light. It knows the way."
A strange unease wormed into his chest. He considered walking away, but the lantern pulled at him, like it was waiting. He hesitated, then picked it up. As soon as his hand wrapped around the cool metal handle, the night shifted. The moon disappeared behind a black sky, and thick fog rolled in, swallowing the field whole. Mason tried to retrace his steps, but the grass seemed endless, looping in every direction. He walked for what felt like hours, yet found no way out. Every so often he spotted figures in the distance, shadowy outlines barely visible in the mist. But these weren't strangers. They were familiar. His father, who had passed 10 years ago, stood with hollow eyes and outstretched arms. His ex-girlfriend, Sarah, swayed gently, lips curled into a smile too wide for her face. The flame in the lantern flickered, threatening to go out. Panic set in. Mason shouted at the figures, pleaded with them to leave him alone. But they only came closer, and with each step they took, the light dimmed further. Finally, the lantern died. The darkness pressed in, thick as oil, suffocating him. And in the last second before his scream dissolved into nothingness, Mason realized he was never going to leave the field. A week later, Jordan pulled his truck to the side of the deserted road. He was running late and hated the lonely drive, but nature was calling. As he stepped out into the cold air, he noticed a wallet lying just off the road, half buried in the grass. Curious, Jordan picked it up. Inside was a photo of a young man with a crooked grin, standing in a field. Scrawled on the back were 2 words: "Find me." The message sent a chill down Jordan's spine. He felt a strange pull toward the nearby field, as if the photo itself was guiding him. Against his better instincts, he climbed the fence and wandered into the tall grass. The world grew quieter with every step, the stars above winking out one by one. Jordan spotted the same lantern Mason had found, now flickering dimly atop the post. And then, as if pulled from thin air, a man emerged from the fog. He wore the same grin as the photo, but with dead, milky eyes. It was Mason. Mason's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, a whisper slid into Jordan's ear. his own voice repeating the words from the photo. "Find me." The figures in the fog began to gather, Mason among them, and Jordan bolted for his truck, heart pounding. He jumped inside, slamming the door behind him, but his hands trembled too much to start the engine. In the rearview mirror, Mason's grinning face loomed from the back seat. The truck veered off the road moments later. Emma and Tyler were driving home from a late-night dinner when they saw the truck, wrecked and smoking, half buried in a ditch. Tyler slowed the car and Emma leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. No driver in sight. It pulled over, and Emma climbed out, her breath clouding in the cold air. She found a wallet near the open driver's door. Flipping it open, she saw a photo of Mason, but this time, the grin on his face seemed off, like it was stretched far too tight. As Emma stared at the photo, her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down and froze. A message from an unknown number.
"It's not over. You're next."
A photo of her and Tyler, taken from outside the car, was attached. Emma's stomach twisted. She turned to shout for Tyler, but something stopped her. A flicker of light coming from the field. She stared, transfixed, as figures began to emerge from the fog. Her heart hammered in her chest as she recognized them. They were all Emma. Dozens of versions of herself, each with the same vacant expression and horrifying grin, marched toward her from the mist. Tyler honked the horn, snapping her back to reality. Emma sprinted back into the vehicle and they sped off. But in the rearview mirror, Emma saw the reflection of her grinning double, sitting in the back seat, right between her and Tyler. Emma couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her own twisted reflection in the fog. The unknown number kept texting. More photos of her. More warnings.
"Come back to the field, or you won't wake up."
That night she found Tyler lying pale and cold in their bed. His chest barely rose with each breath. Emma knew what she had to do. She drove back to the field, fear wrapping around her heart like barbed wire. The lantern was waiting for her. As she stepped into the fog, the mist thickened around her like a cocoon. Tyler stood by the post, his eyes lifeless, lips parted slightly as if he were whispering a secret. Beside him was Mason, whose grin now stretched from ear to ear, splitting his cheeks unnaturally. Mason leaned close, his breath cold against Emma's ear. "Take the lantern," he whispered. "You know what happens if you don't." Emma's hands shook as she wrapped her fingers around the lantern's handle. The moment she lifted it, the world shifted. The fog rolled in thick as smoke and Tyler's body crumpled to the ground. Behind her, Mason and the other figures began to laugh. A guttural, inhumane sound that echoed endlessly in the mist. Emma clutched the lantern tighter, knowing that she was now its keeper. The light dimmed further. Sheriff Hernandez wasn't supposed to work the night shift, but when a call came about an abandoned car near the old field, she took it. She'd grown up hearing stories about the field, stories she never believed, until tonight. When she arrived, the field was silent and still, bathed in a thick fog. Something glinted in the distance. She found a lantern burning low, hanging from a crooked post. A voice drifted from the mist, familiar, yet foreign.
Keep the light going, or they'll never leave.
Before she could react, the fog shifted and figures appeared. Mason, Emma, Tyler, and countless others. Their faces were warped with impossible smiles, eyes wide and empty. One by one, they whispered in unison,
"It's your turn now."
The weight of the lantern in her hand grew heavier. She tried to drop it, but her fingers wouldn't obey. As the figures circled closer, the lantern's light flickered weakly. And then Hernandez saw her daughter's face in the crowd, staring back at her from the mist. Eyes blank, lips curved into a slow, sinister smile. Tears welled in the sheriff's eyes as she realized the truth. The lantern could only be passed on, and someone always had to carry it. With trembling hands, she lifted the lantern higher, watching helplessly as the fog swallowed her whole. And in the distance, another light began to flicker, waiting for its next keeper.